Hello and welcome back to Beckler Guitars and Repair. And today we're checking out a 1993 Fender Strat Squier series, Korean made. And I managed to pick this guitar up for $50. It needs some work, but I've got high hopes for it. Let's check it out. Alright, I was browsing Facebook, and in one of my sale groups, someone was having a moving sale and then a whole bunch of stuff listed for sale, and then some part of the list that said electric guitar, $50. So I inquired about that. They sent me some pics and I went and picked it up really quick. And here it is. So yeah, it came with a case, which I mean is probably worth more than the $50 itself. And this is a 1993 Squier series Fender Strat. So these guitars were made in Korea at the Court plant. So if you're not familiar with Cortec in Korea, they make all sorts of different guitars from all sorts of different brands. Ibanez, Schecter, PRS, just everything. And the quality is known to be really, really high on all of their guitars, which is kind of why Korean guitars are going for a premium these days. It's kind of the same thing that happened with Japanese guitars, as they were cheap until people realized they're pretty high quality, and then the prices start going up. Especially since new Korean guitars these days are no longer that cheap. They're actually pretty expensive now. So Fender made these guitars at Korea Court from 1992 till 1994. And generally they're not known to be the best quality. I think it's because these guitars were made of pretty cheap materials, so I think Fender was giving Court the direction to make these guitars with, you know, cheap parts. So even though the plant was very capable of putting out really high-end stuff, they were probably held back with what they were allowed to use for these guitars. A lot of these guitar bodies were actually made of plywood, so I haven't taken this thing apart at all. I just basically got it, and I wanted to do a video on it, exploring it as I took it apart. So we're going to find out if this is actually a plywood body or not. But it's a pretty standard Stratocaster layout. You've got our 6-point trem with the vintage style saddles labeled Fender, and 3 single coil pickups, 5-way selector switch, 1 volume, 2 tone. And this is kind of a nice finish. It's either candy apple red or fiesta red, but it's a pretty striking red. It looks good. And it's got a nice rosewood fingerboard. The fingerboard's nice and thick. It's got, looks like acrylic dot inlays for fret markers. Looks like a plastic nut. And there's our headstock. It's got the silver Fender logo. It says made in Korea with the serial number there, which dates it to a 1993. And we can see our Squier series on the headstock. What a lot of people do would just rub this off and rub this off so nobody could tell where it was made. But this one's preserved, so that's good. The neck pocket looks nice and tight. Not a big gap in there, so that's a good sign. This one also came with an aftermarket trem bar. Black. It fits good though. And overall the guitar is in pretty decent condition. No big scratches or dings out of it. And I do like the color. It's got a blank neck plate there. And these ones do have the skunk stripe. And the tuners look pretty cheap. So yeah, condition wise I'm pretty impressed with how good everything looks. It's definitely pretty dirty, but getting this thing with a case for $50 was definitely a really, really good deal. And the frets look like they're in decent shape. There's a little bit of wear over here. There's some divots. Nothing too bad. They can be easily polished or filed out. The fingerboard looks pretty gross. There's lots of stuff on there. Definitely needs a good cleaning. But I plugged it in and it seems to work. I think there was some cutting in and out on one of the volume pots, so we'll have to fix that too. But yeah, I think we can get this thing up and running. And I do like the feel of the neck. It does feel good. So let's go ahead and get on the bench and get some specs. So pretty average weight for a Strat, weighing in at 7 pounds, 13.3 ounces, or 3.55 kilograms. Alright, so I couldn't find anywhere online that told me what these pickups are on this model, so they were likely just generic factory pickups that they put in here. But let's just see what they're reading here. In the bridge position, it's reading a 5.12. In the middle position, a 5.01. And in the neck position, a 5.03. So unfortunately, we can see right away that this is a plywood body. You can see the multi layers of the wood there. So yeah, definitely a plywood body. I mean, the tone wood debate is, you know, more relevant than ever. And we just did a review on a Dan Electro that's made out of plywood and compressed fiberboard. That sounded great. So I'm not really convinced that it holds too much of an effect on the overall sound of an instrument. I know it probably does play some role in the overall sound, but I guess we'll see with this guitar how it sounds. And the neck looks good. There's some factory marking there that has rubbed off. But the neck seems really high quality. It feels like a normal Fender neck with the thick rosewood fingerboard and the maple and the skunk stripe for the truss. And there's no shims or anything in the neck. So that means the action was actually pretty good on this guitar. So hopefully we don't need any shims or anything. And the neck fits in there reasonably well. It's a bit of a tight fit. It's could be a little tighter, but it's not bad. I've definitely had worse, even USA Fenders that didn't quite fit that well. And there's no gaps in the side, so it's a good neck fit. Alright, here's a look at the pick guard and the electronics. So yeah, these are ceramic magnet pickups. And it's got mini pots and an offshore switch. Looks pretty cheap, to be honest. Yeah, these are definitely not the highest quality components. And mixed with the plywood body, starting to have a few doubts about how this guitar is going to sound. And yeah, the bottom, the cavities are shielded. You can see there, it's got shielding paint. And it's actually routed for humbucker, single humbucker. So you could actually change the configuration on this guitar if you wanted to. The routes look clean. You can see within the routes that it's definitely plywood as well. So this whole body is plywood. So despite the body being made of cheaper components, the neck does appear to be really nice. It's got a really nice piece of rosewood, and it's got a nice feel to it. The fretwork looks to be well done, and there's no fret sprout at all. And it's one of the Fender models with the skunk stripe here too. So I'm just going to go ahead and clean up this neck. There's a lot of gunk on the fingerboard that I'm going to clean off, and I'm going to polish the frets and try to get these divots out. And then we'll see how it looks. So these frets do have some minor divots on them. You can see here in the cowboy cord area that there's a little bit of divot there. However, they're not very deep, so they're very easy to file out. So what I'm using is just a diamond file here, and what I'm going to be doing is just a couple passes on the fret until that I go down deep enough that it files out those divots. And then I'll re-put the flat spot on with like a block, a sanding block, and then I'm gonna go ahead and repolish it and rehydrate the fingerboard, and it should look a lot better. Alright, so here's a look at the fingerboard now, all oiled and polished, and managed to get all those divots out of the frets. It's looking good now. It's a really nice piece of rosewood, nice and streaky. So one thing I noticed that I want to fix is if you look at the nut here, you can see how deep those nut slots are, and that can be a tuning stability problem because the string sits so far deep in those that when you tune up it'll bind, and then yeah, that can give you tuning issues. So what I'm going to do is just take off some material of the nut so that those nut slots are more shallow and the string kind of sits in there without being too far down, and that should help with tuning. And I'm just using a Dremel tool to remove some material. So there we are, just a quick little fix, and now our nut slots aren't nearly as deep, so that should help. And I just wanted to comment on these tuning machines. They do seem really cheap. If you see this style of machine heads, typically they're pretty low quality, but they do seem to function properly, so we'll see how they do. I tested all these frets with a fret rocker and everything seems to be level, so I'm going to go ahead and put this back on the body and then set up the guitar. Alright, let's take a quick look at condition here. So here it is, all cleaned up. And it's in pretty nice condition. There's a look at our silver Fender logo with the serial. And there's no scratches or dings on the headstock. The truss rod works well. And our nut is cut nicely now. Nice and shallow. And again, we did look at the fingerboard already. It's nice and hydrated and polished now. And the body's in good condition, no big scratches or dings anywhere. If you look in the light, you can see some like surface level scuffs. And there's a kind of a couple checking marks here and there. But overall, there's another check right there. But overall, nice shape, considering the age. And look at the back. Again, just some surface level scuffs. I should be able to clean off too. I'll polish that up. And no scratches or dings, and the neck looks nice too. No marks or impressions on the neck. And the back of our headstock. To get a very nice setup on this guitar. So using our notch straight edge, you can see that there's just a very little gap between the straight edge and the fingerboard. So that tells us that there's very little relief in the neck. The truss rod's set nice and tight, which is how I like to set my guitars. And then here in the 3rd fret, we can see that when I use the 3rd fret, the string rests almost on that 1st fret. So that tells us the neck is straight, the truss is tight, and it's a well-cut nut. So we've got nice action here. And then in the 12th fret, using our depth gauge, we can see that at the 12th fret on the low E, our action is sitting at just about a 1 millimeter. And on the high E, it's between a 0.75 and a 1. So very nice low action. Let's get some neck dimensions. At the nut, it's a 1.69 or a 43.04 millimeters. At the 12th fret, it's a 2.04 inches or a 52.03 millimeters. Neck depth at the 1st fret is a 0.87 inches or a 22.2 millimeters. And at the 12th fret, that is a 0.86 inches or a 21.86 millimeters. So I just measured again, and yeah, the neck is pretty much the same here as it is by the 12th in terms of thickness, so it stays pretty uniform. So this is a standard scale length, 25.5 scale length, but I noticed that the neck radius seemed a little bit flatter than normal for a Fender. So I just decided to double check that, and it's actually showing a 12-inch radius. So that's a little different than Fender usually. And here's a look at our neck profile. So it stays pretty standard C, but it does flatten out a little bit by the 12th despite staying the same thickness. So yeah, it's a little different. I just want to run through the neck, make sure there's no buzzing or fretting out anywhere. I like to speed up this part, but if you want to hear it in real time, just slow down the player to 25%. So yeah, very nice low action and no fretting or buzzing out anywhere. And this neck does feel great. It's the edges are nice and rolled too, so it's actually very comfortable to play, and there's no fret sprout at all. Alright, let's go ahead and plug it into an amp and hear how it sounds. Alright, I'm plugged into my 1965 Fender Bassman. It's a nice transparent amp. It's very good to hear the individual characteristics of each guitar. So that's why I like using it for these demos. And I'm just going to go through each of the pickup positions clean and then with a little bit of dirt. Yeah, it sounds nice, clean. I really like the single pickup positions, like the bridge, the middle, and the neck, like the 135. I feel like the blended positions are a little weak in terms of tone, but the other ones seem nice. All right, let's try it with a little bit of distortion. Alright, so what are my final thoughts on the 1993 Made in Korea Fender Strat Squier series in Candy Apple Red? You know, despite this guitar being made of pretty cheap components, especially the body, the neck is great, actually. It's nothing wrong with the neck at all. It's made of premium woods, and it's really well put together. There's no fret issues at all. They're really well done. It gets nice and low with no buzzing or fretting out anywhere. And it feels great. It's got a flatter radius, is what I like. This is actually a 12-inch radius, so like a Gibson. So I actually prefer that. So the neck feels great. And the body, despite, you know, being made of cheaper components, the pickups are, you know, cheaper ceramic style. And the components were pretty cheap with like the mini pots and the offshore switch. It did sound really nice plugged in. I didn't really like the blended pickup positions. But 1, 3, and 5, just the single pickup positions, all sounded really clear and articulate. They tended to get a little bit muddy in the blended positions. I'm not sure why that is. But the bridge pickup really did sound great. And the neck and the middle as well. Is it the best sounding Strat I've ever played? No, but, you know, for this price point, this is a very, very solid guitar. And it actually ended up staying in tune really well. I wasn't too sure about these tuners. They look pretty cheap. But after we removed the material on the nut, it stayed in tune great. Overall, quite happy with this guitar, especially since I spent $50 on it. With a little bit of work, it really came to life. And this guitar is going to be for sale on our Reverb page if you're interested in it. I'm going to keep the case back for a different guitar, but this will come with a soft shell. But that's going to be it for today. Thank you for tuning in to Beckler Guitars and Repair, and I'll have more for you really soon. Thanks a lot.